that at the turn of the 21st century, Grenache Noir was one of the 3 most widely planted cultivars in the entire world, not least of all in France's southern Rhone and in Spain. More recently though, Grenache has been overtaken by inkier, more richer coloured cultivars like Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Tempranillo. As of 2017, it still held a top 10 position, I think sitting at roughly number 7, but it's worth noting that Grenache was on a particularly notable downward trend, whereas it was being chased very hard by Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Noir, both of which were on an upward trend. So whether it still holds a position in the top 10 is hard to know. We'll have to wait until the OIV performs another very useful global cultivar statistics study like it did in 2017. But the reason that we're talking Grenache today is because today's hand and solar wine of the day is Kloovenburg's Lledoner Pelut 2022, which is a 100% Grenache Noir wine. But we're not talking about just any old Grenache, we're talking about South Africa's only bottling of the very rare mutation of Grenache Noir, Lledoner Pelut. Lledoner Pelut is more commonly referred to as Grenache Peluda, but Kloovenburg chose to label the wine as Lledoner Pelut in order to stay on the right side of the law, even though it would be easier to market the wine if it had the term Grenache or Grenache somewhere on the label. You see, Savas has registered the cultivar as Lledoner Pelut, and so to label it as anything else would be deemed either illegal or at the very least frowned upon. Then again, a cultivar like Petit Syrah is actually registered in South Africa as Durif, and yet the vast majority of South African producers who bottle this cultivar seem to have no qualms with selling it as Petit Syrah instead of Durif, mostly because that's what the cultivar gets called in California, and so it's far more widely recognized and again, easier to sell. It would seem the legality of the issue is akin to perhaps how South Africans treat speed limits. Now, when Grenache Peluda is relaxing at home in Catalonia, Spain, it also is referred to as hairy Grenache. Now, it gets called this because it has loads and loads of tiny little hairs on the underside of its leaves. These little hairs are absolutely essential in protecting against insects. They also protect against certain diseases like downy mildew, and probably most importantly, they dramatically reduce the rate of transpiration in a vine. If you reduce transpiration, you reduce the rate at which that vine loses water. And if you reduce the rate at which it loses water, you reduce the rate at which it uses water, which, as I'm sure you can see, makes it nigh on a super grape in the very important characteristic of drought resistance. But it's no use being some sort of drought-dismissing, disease-dominating wonder grape if you taste like a butt. So what we need to do is get into the glass to see how Grenache Peluda actually stacks up against the more common Grenache Noir clones that we have here in South Africa. When we give this guy a sniff, well, you may be either elated or disappointed to realize that it smells pretty much like a Grenache. You have this classic Grenache mix of cherry candy, maybe also a little bit of red plum, and then you have the kind of herbal, spicy, peppery, rocket leaf note, which I often get on Grenache, and then also a little bit of fennel or licorice, which again is not shattering the mold. But what this wine has that not every Grenache has is a really lovely little hint of rose petal as well. When we give this wine a sip, well, again, it's not breaking any molds here. There's lovely sweet cherry fruit, cherry candy, more plum fruit. This particular wine does have a fascinating Star King red apple fruit note, which I don't get on a lot of red wines, but by and large it is Grenache-ish in its nature. On the tail end there are some fairly grippy tannins. I mean, this is a 22, so it's still fairly young, and then especially if you serve the wine cold, the finish can be a little bit bitter, but as it warms up and the fruit silkens up and sweetens up, your perception of tannins drops down a little, and that end really begins to soften and linger quite beautifully. And at this point you might say, wait, Han, before you go, I have one more question. If this super grape Grenache Peluda is more disease resistant and more insect resistant and more drought resistant and tastes and smells as good or even better than most of the common Grenache Noir clones that we have here in South Africa, then why on earth is there only one vineyard in the entire country? And the answer, unfortunately, once again comes down to economics. because Grenache Pelut is known for producing very small berries and very small bunches. And the combination of small berries and small bunches can be, in a perfect world, superior concentration in wine. But it almost always also means a much higher cost of production due to a far lower yield. So for the most part, the common Grenache Noir clones produce more fruit, higher yields, lower cost of production of wine as well, and therefore they win out over the Grenache Pelut, even though Grenache Pelut may be a hardier cultivar that would do better in the Cape Winelands. Okay, so that's all we have time for today, but if you have any questions about Grenache Pelut or about Kloovenburg or about winemaker Duncan Stewart, then please drop us a note and I will do my best to get back to you. If you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon so that we can make more of these videos, and subscribe to the Hendrik Solar YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month talking about things like wine science, wine history, unusual hairy cultivars, and some of the rising winemaking stars that are coming out of the dynamic South African winelands.